do on a national level. So I start there, and I'm probably a little long-winded, Steve, but you triggered that when you said they didn't know how they live as free men, and everybody at an individual level has to figure that out for themselves. It's your life. You're free to go where you want to go. It doesn't mean it will be as easy for you as versus someone who has more money or more education or more mentoring. It may be harder for you, but it's still your life, and you have to take charge of it.
Wow. Hey, Dave, I could listen to you for the whole 50 minutes if you want to take the whole show today, because I'm really enjoying listening to you. Nelson Mandela is a phenomenal human being, and yes, 29 years, I think, is how long he was in prison. Is that right?
I think it was actually 27, but that's pretty. I'm impressed.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, well, hey, Dave.
It's very symbolic. The first 17 years he was on Robben's Island, which is an island just off of Cape Town. And the symbolism of that is really interesting, because the downtown Cape Town is as metropolitan as any United States city. You wouldn't know the difference between being there or being in Charlotte. It's a very, very modern city. And there, across an expanse of 4 or 5 miles of water, is a little island. And that's where they've actually put the leader of the Free Society for 17 years, who was advocating for this. Again, the contrast, striking. And this is in our lifetime. This is in the early 90s.
So Dave, I told you when we were having a conversation before the show that one of the things that I'm really got a passion for, yesterday at church, the pastor was given a sermon on burden, B-U-R-D-E-N. And everybody thinks about burden as being a something that's got you beaten down, like a beast of burden. That's a Rolling Stones song, by the way, I think, Beast of Burden. But with the burden, Dave, there's a spiritual context for burden, which means something that is really heavy on your heart. Heavy on your heart. And I have a burden for wanting to do more for the downtrodden, the people with broken hearts, the people that are lost hope. So, with that said, what I was talking to my wife about this morning, but in preparation for the show, is we can tell stories all day long about people like Nelson Mandela, but the thing that I want to know is if we've got somebody that's out there at that low spot in life, what do we do to get them to actually take that next step forward to do something to take charge of their life? So I got some thoughts on it, Dave, but if you've got some thoughts, hit me with yours first.
You hope that the person just gets started. And I don't know what it is that triggers that in people. I wish I did. And maybe it's hearing enough people like you say it or me say it, or in our cases we heard it from our parents or others that we just looked up to. You just have to get started and take, it almost sounds trite, these small little first steps. And they aren't that big when you step back and you can look at them objectively. The problem is if you're in that space, and you're in that mentality at that time, it's hard to see that. And so you got to get started. So now you tell me your thoughts, Steve, because they're probably a lot more well pulled together than what I just said.
Well, they're not, but the reason is that this is kind of what I do for a living, so to speak. I don't get paid yet, but it's kind of what I like to do here. Okay, I got a couple thoughts on it that I want to hit you with right off the bat. I tell a story, and when I teach, especially in prisons, where I'll do it to you right now, Dave. Dave, tonight when you're brushing your teeth, I want you to look in that mirror. And I want you to look at the person that you see in that mirror. And I want you to like what you see, Dave. I want you to enjoy the person that you're looking at as you are watching you go through this transformation, this metamorphosis, as you see yourself starting to change right before your very eyes, as you are becoming the person that you've always wanted to be. That's right, Dave. I want you to really enjoy as you see yourself changing in front of your very eyes, as you see yourself becoming a nerd, Dave, N-E-R-D. And then I stop. You're like, oh, yeah, you're telling me that I'm becoming a nerd? I want you to stop for a minute, though. Dave, what is your description of a nerd?
Someone who likes the very technical nuance of whatever the subject is. Almost like so that's what I think of.
Okay. I looked it up in the dictionary and all that stuff, and they got that TV show that everybody likes. It escapes me for a second. The show with the guy that's the nerd on TV. I love that show. Yeah, I'll come back to it later. I just can't get it. But a nerd is a person who's kind of like a bookworm, who doesn't have real good social skills, who's a little withdrawn, from being out there, maybe not real comfortable, but really gets into intelligence. And so here's the next part of my story. There's a knock on the door, and the guy comes in and says, "I'll be the nerd. Hey, Steve, why don't you come out and hang with me on the street right now? Let's go out and hang." And then I look at that person and I say, "Not me, man. That street you're on is a one-way street going to nowhere, and I don't want to be out there anymore. In fact, I want to stay home and go to bed early tonight because I got a job interview tomorrow, and I found out that if I get more sleep the night before an interview, I usually feel more comfortable. I do better. And besides, I'm trying to get my plan together. I'm trying to look at my budget for the next month so I can figure out how to get where I got to go." Dave, the point of the story is that there comes a time in a person's life where they got to stop and take a hard look at themselves and realize that what they're doing is not working. And they have to decide it's time to change. And so that's all I'm really trying to say. And so how do we get people to wake up and realize that what they're doing is not working and it's time to change? We get them close to us to where they want, like Johnny, like me and Johnny, where they get to where they want to listen to us a little bit so we can help them see things so that they can believe in themselves better and start to take responsibility.
And Steve, let me add to that. I think that's absolutely right. And we talk a lot, you and I talk a lot about, and I know you preach this in prisons, and I'll preach it to anybody that will listen, is you have to read. You have to read, you have to read. Well, so why is reading important? Because if you lack confidence, you should start reading stories about people that have succeeded based probably on less talents than you had. And how did they do it? And why did they do it? And how did they believe that? And so you start finding examples, and the examples may be in books, people you don't even know. But that often opens you up to seeing people around you that are succeeding. And you start seeing what they do. And so you have to find inspiration in books, in articles, in your life around you. And that builds confidence. And oftentimes that stuff like that can trigger you to get going and saying, I'm going to take it. I can do this. Others can do it. They were no better than me. They may have had bigger obstacles than I did. They overcome it, came it. I'm going to take a shot. I'm going to get engaged. And it's not and I liked your story about being in front of the mirror. It's you should do that every day, not just one day. You should do that every day. When you look, and you and I've talked about this in the past, Steve, on one of the previous shows. The greatest Americans of all time, they did it every day. You know, Franklin had his 13 virtues, and Washington had his. They believed this, and they constantly had to remind themselves. It just didn't come naturally. They had to work on it. And so same with people, if you lack the confidence, you know, there's a term I've heard, which I kind of like, is you fake it until you make it. And if you lack confidence, you gotta fake it for a long time. You gotta keep telling yourself, I can do it, I can do it, I can do it. And maybe, you know, you don't fully believe that, but you gotta keep saying it to yourself. All of us, I don't care who you are. Well, maybe there's a few people who have no doubts. 99.99% of the people in the world have doubts. And we somehow convince ourselves that we can do it, and we keep going for it.
That's good. Yeah, people that are feeling a little self-doubting, they're not alone. That's a true thing. Hey Dave, I was talking to my wife, Donna, this morning, and I gave her this example about, so how do you get people doing something that will basically change their behavior once they decide to do it? And I gave an example about a second grade teacher, and she's trying to teach her students multiplication tables. And this week, her objective on the sheet they give teachers, class objectives, goals, is to teach these students how to count by 5. Now, you could teach your students how to count by 5 by telling them to be very quiet and going 5 plus 5 equals 10. 10 plus 5 equals 15. 15 plus 5 equals 20, and so on. But the teacher, if she can engage those students, and the goal here is to get them into something that they want to do, that's enjoyable, that will have repetition and practices and drills, and before you know it, a month later, she'll be at a parent-teacher conference, and parents will be saying, "You are an amazing teacher. My child just loves counting by 5. She's singing that song, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. Dave, what I'm getting at is the secret is this. It's got to be to where the person that wants to work on something that will make their skills better, which ultimately will make their life better, they have to want to do it.
So Steve, let me jump in. I agree. You said something a couple minutes ago where you were talking about burden, and you were then said something like, it's a burden, you're talking about yourself, it's a burden of helping other people that I want to do. As soon as you turn it into something that you want to do, it's no longer a burden. So gardening for me is a burden. I was like, I can't think of anything worse than going out and working in a garden. That would be a burden. And yet, there are so many people that love gardening. They love being out there because they see it as something they're improving, and they love it. It's not a burden. School and learning is not a burden if you can attach it to where you're trying to get to. You're trying to get ahead. You're learning. You're reading. You're setting goals. It takes it from a task and a burden to something that you feel good about. So as an example of that, going back to Mandela, while he was on Robben's Island, one of the burdens he did was to learn Afrikaans. Afrikaans is the language of the white Dutch group that came to South Africa. So he did that because he saw it as a way that he could better connect with his prison guards, and ideally when he got out, he could connect better with that population. So it wasn't a burden. Now, if you gave me the task of learning Afrikaans, that would be a burden. So my point